Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a really fascinating anatomical journey today. Think of this as an architectural tour of the lower jaw, specifically the mandible. We shouldn't just think of this bone as merely a part of the skull. It's an absolute masterpiece of biological engineering that we literally use every single time we speak, smile, or bite into an apple. So let's dive into its nooks, crannies, and all the incredible structures that make the whole shebang work. Right off the bat, the mandible holds some pretty serious records. It's the largest, the strongest, and the only movable bone of the entire facial skeleton. Embryologically speaking, it originates from the first pharyngeal arch, and honestly, this bone is an absolute powerhouse. It's capable of exerting up to 200 pounds of bite force. That's just wild. It serves as the vital structural foundation for your lower teeth and the ultimate anchor for those heavy-duty muscles that let you chew.
All right, here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. 1. Meet the mighty mandible. 2. Exploring the mandibular body. 3. The vertical ramus. 4. Processes and the TMJ. And finally, 5. A high-yield exam review.
So part 1, let's officially meet the mighty mandible.
Before we get completely lost in the specific landmarks, we really need to understand the jaw's fundamental geometry. The mandible is basically a giant horseshoe-shaped bone broken down into two main structural components. First up, you have the body. This is the horizontal portion, the actual horseshoe curve that wraps right around the front of your face. Then, attached to the posterior ends of that body are the two rami, or ramus for singular. These are the vertical, kind of quadrangular plates extending upward towards your ear. And together, these two main components work in perfect harmony to support our teeth, enable speech, and form the temporal mandibular joint, or TMJ.
Moving right along to part 2. Exploring the mandibular body. Let's take a look at that horizontal horseshoe. Starting at the very front of the chin and sweeping along the outer surface, our first major landmark is the symphysis menti. Fun fact, when you're born, your mandible is actually in two halves. They fuse right down the midline during your first year of life, and this faint ridge is the leftover evidence. Right below that sits the mental protuberance, which is just the fancy anatomical term for the triangular prominence that actually forms your chin. Down at the bottom corners, we've got the mental tubercles, which give the chin its classic rounded shape. Finally, sweeping back from the chin is the oblique line. This is a crucial ridge that provides a mounting point for several facial muscles.
Let's mentally flip the bone around for a second and look at the inner medial surface right behind the chin. Here, we find 4 small, pinpoint elevations called the genial tubercles. They're neatly organized into upper and lower pairs, and they act as super important muscle anchors. The superior genial tubercles provide the origin point for the genioglossus muscle, so think glossus, meaning tongue. Right below them, the inferior genial tubercles act as the origin for the geniohyoid muscle, connecting straight down to your hyoid bone in the neck. Moving just a bit laterally along that inner surface, we stumble upon a really clever piece of spatial organization. Take the mylohyoid line, for example. It's a prominent oblique ridge that acts almost like a room divider. It gives origin to the mylohyoid muscle, which forms the actual floor of your mouth, but structurally, it splits the inner bone surface into 2 distinct depressions just to house your salivary glands. Below the line, you've got the submandibular fossa for the large submandibular gland, and above the line, the sublingual fossa perfectly tucks away the sublingual gland right under your tongue. Pretty neat, right?
To wrap up our tour of the horizontal body, let's quickly check out its top and bottom borders. The upper border is also known as the alveolar border. This is the top edge containing all those little sockets or alveoli that hold your lower teeth perfectly in place. Then there's the lower border, which is the thick, rounded base of the mandible. Right near the midline on the inside of this base, it features a tiny oval depression called the digastric fossa. That's exactly where the anterior belly of the digastric muscle attaches to help pull your jaw open.
Okay, moving upward to part 3, let's talk about the vertical ramus.
Sweeping backward from the horizontal body, we travel up into those vertical, quadrangular plates on the sides of the jaw. Now, the outside surface of the ramus is relatively flat to make room for the massive masseter chewing muscle. But the medial inner surface, it is packed with critical landmarks. Front and center is the mandibular foramen. Right next to it is the lingula, which is this sharp, tongue-shaped projection of bone pointing toward the head of the mandible, acting as a crucial attachment point for the sphenomandibular ligament. And right below the foramen, the mylohyoid groove runs diagonally downward to safely house the mylohyoid nerve and vessels. So how does this all connect? Well, it builds into an incredible internal transit system. The mandibular foramen isn't just a surface divot, it's literally the entrance to a tunnel. Step 1. The inferior alveolar nerve, artery, and vein enter the mandibular foramen. Step 2. They travel downward and forward right through the center of the bone, inside the mandibular canal, supplying the lower teeth along the way. Step 3. The pathway ends when the nerve and vessels pop back out on the outside of the chin through the mental foramen. It's a perfectly designed internal highway.
Now, why does this specific internal anatomy matter in real life? Well, if you've ever had work done on your lower teeth, you have definitely experienced the clinical importance of this pathway. Dentists actually use the mental foramen, where that nerve exits the bone, as a primary landmark for local anesthesia. By targeting this exact area, they numb the mental nerve. Because of how this nerve branches out, a single injection here results in profound numbness across your entire lower lip, your chin, and your lower teeth. It's a real game changer in dentistry.
Before we climb to the very peak of the jaw, let's quickly trace the four borders of the ramus. The anterior border is thin and sharp, flowing seamlessly down into that oblique line on the body we explored earlier. The posterior border is thick and rounded, running down towards your neck. The lower border meets the body at the angle of the mandible. But the upper border is where the real magic happens. It curves dramatically downward to form a deep U shape called the mandibular notch.
All right, part 4, processes and the TMJ. We've reached the highest points on our tour.
Framing that U-shaped mandibular notch we just talked about are two highly specialized towers of bone, the coronoid process in the front and the condyloid process in the back. Let's break them down. The coronoid process is anterior, shaped like a flattened triangle pointing straight up. Its main job? Serving as the insertion point for the mighty temporalis muscle, which is what pulls your jaw shut. In stark contrast, the condyloid process is posterior. It's a much thicker, heavier upward projection topped with a very distinct head and neck.
Let's zoom in on that condyloid process for a second, because it's pretty much entirely responsible for your jaw movement. The head of the condyle is expanded side to side and covered with smooth fibrocartilage. It fits flawlessly into the base of your skull, specifically the temporal bone, to form the temporomandibular joint, or TMJ. Every single time you open your mouth, this head is actively rotating and gliding. Right below it is the narrowed neck, featuring a small depression on the front known as the pterygoid fovea. This right here is the exact insertion point for the lateral pterygoid muscle, the one that pulls your jaw forward.
And finally, part 5, our high-yield exam review. Let's lock in everything we just learned.
All right, tour complete. Now let's throw a few rapid-fire questions your way to see how well you've absorbed all this anatomy. First question, from which pharyngeal arch does the mandible develop? Think back to the very beginning of our journey. Got it? Yep, it's the first pharyngeal arch, the absolute foundational embryonic structure for the lower jaw. Moving on to the next question, what vital structures pass through the mandibular foramen on the inside of the ramus? Remember that internal highway we talked about? Take a second. The answer is the inferior alveolar nerve and vessels. They enter there, travel safely through the bone, and eventually make their exit at the mental foramen. Okay, question 3, and we literally just covered this one. Which process gives insertion to the lateral pterygoid muscle? Think about the very top of the jaw. It is the pterygoid fovea, perfectly located right on the neck of the condyloid process. Final question to bring this whole thing home. Which is the only movable bone of the skull, excluding the tiny auditory ossicles? It is, of course, the mighty mandibula. I really hope this explainer has given you a totally newfound appreciation for the incredible architecture sitting right under your skin. Honestly, next time you bite into a meal or even just talk to a friend, take a split second to marvel at the biomechanical masterpiece that is your lower jaw. It begs the question, what other structural marvels are hiding in plain sight inside the human body? Keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next explainer.